Tony from that Talking Remote here again this week. Fantastic to have a great guest. I've got Shane Hastie with me. How are you, Shane?
I am good, Tony. It's been far, far too long since we last caught up.
Far, far too long. All the way from the land of the white cloud, of course, in New Zealand. So great to have you.
You're right.
Those of you who are listening, don't forget to subscribe to our Teamcraft newsletter. You'll find the details below. And, of course, don't forget to like and subscribe so we keep this thing going. And join our remote community, remoteaf.co. Click the community button. Join a lot of like-minded individuals talking about stuff like we're going to talk about today, including things like the rock crusher and the flow-based backlog model. But before we get to that, Shane, could you just tell everybody a little bit about yourself? Because not everybody's going to know you like I do.
Kia ora tata. Called Shane Hastie 10A, folks. Yeah, I'm Shane. I live in a little town called Otaki in New Zealand. I'm a father. I'm a grandfather. I work for SoftEd, part of the skills development group, and they call me the global delivery lead, which means I'm the mentor for most of our instructors. And I've been doing product stuff for 4 decades now, Tony.
I was just going to say.
I was looking back. I've got some. I actually still got the books from my very first systems analysis training in 1983.
Well, I heard what you said there. I like to get around it by saying it's my 3rd decade of doing agility, because I've been in the business long, of course, and I've known you for at least a couple of decades, if not more. So I'm working with Shane on things like the backlog, for example, many years ago. So it's an absolute pleasure to have you on. And Shane, you have a book, and the book is called The Rock Crusher Model.
We have a book. Based
backlog. So that was your cue. You can find that at all good bookstores. No, actually, you can find it at Amazon and associated books. Please go there, get a copy. There you go. I've done a plug for you.
Thank you very much.
If I'm doing a plug for it, I think people might want to know a little bit about it. So let's start with, what's the premise of the book from the author's version, or I should say co-author. You have 2 other authors, which is Ryland Layton and Steve Adolph. But guys, Shane's got the limelight today, so sorry, bad luck. Shane?
Cool. The premise of the book is many organizations really struggle to manage their backlogs well. There are some who do it incredibly well. But in our experience, working across multiple decades, working across many different organizations globally, because I'm obviously based in New Zealand, worked a lot in New Zealand, Australia, and other places, a fair amount in Southeast Asia, and the USA. And then Ryland and Steve's based in Canada, Ryland in the US, also wide and deep experience. And we've drawn from that wide and deep experience the patterns that we have seen that work, and we've identified the patterns that don't, in terms of really managing your backlog well. When I give it a talk, I start it with, your backlog is broken. Here's how we can fix it. Because in most organizations, the way they manage this glorious thing that should be something that unleashes value in our organizations actually becomes a reservoir of rotting ideas.
Yeah. I like that. I call it a triple B, Shane, a big bad backlog, and no one wants to go in there, right? Yeah. And it resonated with me when I read that in the book. You were talking about the fact that it's stagnant and that kind of thing. What I like about it is you also take the idea of it just being this flat sort of backlog thing that people think of, and you've really turned it into thinking about it as the essential lifeline or the lifeblood of your organisation. Talk to me a little bit about your thoughts around that.
So, well, if we go from a reservoir to a flow, one of the first things you've got to do is break the bottom of the pipe. So you pour stuff into this backlog, and it's just stuff's being shoved in, and we're just making the pipe taller and taller and taller in order to hold it. I worked in one organization, we went into, and we were looking at their backlog. And this was not across the whole organization. It was one product stream that had 2,000 plus items in the backlog. And some of them were as old as 7 years. None of those things were going to ever be built. In fact, I would assert that anything older than 90 days is already rotten and should be discarded. But no, every time that team had to have a conversation about the backlog, they had to look at the full 2,000. And it just took up mind space. And when we pruned that, when we went in and we put in the wastegate, we cut it down to about 90 days worth. And suddenly things were flowing. If you reduce the pressure on the pipe, you don't get phantom bottlenecks and things flow. So the rock crusher metaphor comes from literally physically crushing rocks. For myself, early in my career, I did a fair amount of work in the mining industry. I was supporting products in that space. And in the kimberlite diamond mines, so not the alluvial diamond fields where you take the diamonds out of the sand, but the ones where you blast them literally out of the rock. The kimberlite volcanic pipes. What you do is you blast out these big 2-ton blocks of rock, and then you put them through crushers that physically break that apart, and the gems have a higher specific gravity than the other stuff, and the other stuff gets pushed out through a wastegate. It is discarded and the gems drop through. Well, your backlog is the same. You have some gems of these ideas, the things that are really going to be valuable, and then there's a whole lot of other stuff that is the overburden that should be discarded. And the 1, 2, 3 years worth of backlog is overburden. I still assert that if something has been on a backlog for longer than 90 days, maybe in some organizations 180 days.
Who cares about it, right?
It's gone.
Yeah.
If it's longer, it's never going to happen. There might be an important stakeholder who cares about it. And this is often the reason why we don't throw it away, is because so-and-so asked for it. We can't tell them no, but we can tell them not yet. Well, maybe we've got to tell them no sometime. And truly, if the idea is important enough, it'll come back. And if it's been deliberately discarded, when it comes back, the justification will be stronger. Because if it didn't meet the cutoff, the value cutoff, well, then it hadn't been explained well enough if it truly was valuable. Whereas if it sits in that rotting state in the backlog, it's just sitting there, and nobody's saying no, but nobody's saying yes, and it literally is rotting and getting less and less valuable.
So I've got a quick question for you before I ask you my own, of course. So somebody's dropped a nice little question there for you from Escalates Quick.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the number one thing, Shane?
What is the number one thing you should think everyone would do with their backlog today? Go through it identify anything that's older than 90 days and discard it.
Brilliant. And I would say we've been responsible for this a little bit as Agilists, right? So you and I have been in the Agile community. And there's some things that I've said over the period of time that I think that we haven't done well. And, we see a lot of prioritization done with Moscow.
Mm-hmm.
But we let people get away with the won't have, right? And I often see won't have yet.
Yeah.
And the reality of it is exactly what you just said. You've got to be harsh on it. If it hits the W, if it's a won't have, it's a won't have, and there's got to be a reason for that.
Discard it.
Discard it or send it off to be reworked and come back through the process again.
Yeah. And don't have a staging place where you put these ideas, because that just becomes the phantom backlog.
We see those as well.
Okay.
Okay, so the other thing I want to tackle with you while we're talking about that is because you're talking about prioritization itself. And, I bet you and I are having a chat around that, because one of the things that I see is the portfolio layout often where in most organisations and organisational constructs, whether it's small, large, or indifferent, you've got a portfolio view, right? Well, when I work with organisations, I often see the portfolio view as only in progress. So they have a backlog as such, but it's an in-progress backlog, right, if you like.
Yeah.
And this is where you were talking about the pipe or the funnel. Where's the single demand view, and where's that ability to prioritise that view against your in progress? Your thoughts on that?
The metaphor of the rock crusher and the visual model that we use is a funnel. And we've actually got, in the book, we break it down over multiple time horizons. We talk about ready, which are small things that have been refined down to, yes, this is the gem that is worth polishing and pushing through, and it goes through the thin pipe. This is then the next set of stories for the next sprint. It's the top of the Kanban board for the team. Something that's gone down to that ready state. Above that, we have the forecasted. This is something that we believe can be delivered and should be delivered within the next few sprints. And at that level, they've been refined, they've been broken down, and we are discarding. We are still discarding. We're discarding constantly, and we're learning. And we might put some experiments through there. We call them crushers, and I'll come back to what a crusher is in a little while. Then above speculative is above forecasted is speculative. These are bigger rocks. These are bigger chunks that we think there is some value. We don't know where the gems are in there, but we've got some hypotheses. Again, time period. Now we're not doing much work on these, but they're going. We are harshly evaluating them against should we even take this any further at all? Is it worth doing? And at the top is wishful thinking, big ideas. That is, so our portfolio is the overlap between speculative, forecasted, and up to big ideas, and then the product stream backlog is forecasted, ready, and thin pipe. So it does, and there's a bit of a gray area in the middle of the forecasted, whether it should be in the product stream or it still sits in that portfolio view. At the portfolio view, we are doing refinement, but strategic refinement. So irrespective of the size of your rock, some ideas are coming in and they're really big. Some will be coming in and they're really small, and they can drop through the crusher very quickly. But every idea comes in the top. All ideas go through the same filtering mechanism. And at the strategic refinement level, we're trying to answer 4 questions. How valuable is this rock? How big is this rock? From those 2, is it worth doing? And then how ready is it? If it's a small gem that is dropped in the top, this is something it's we can directly identify customer value, organizational value. We really want this. We can do a reasonable forecast of size, and it's small and it's worth doing, and it's more valuable. It's worth more than stuff that is further down. Well, I'll just drop that one straight through. It could come in the top of that funnel into the portfolio today and be in the backlog for a team in tomorrow. On the other hand, it could be a big idea, very, very wishful thinking that we know t-shirt sizes, whatever, this, if we do this, it will be valuable. It will open up a completely new business line for the organization. It's going to be big. It's months and years worth of work. Is it worth it? Yes. Is it ready yet? No. We've got to do a lot more refinement. We might need to choose to open up a completely new value stream for this one and form new teams, stop existing work to refocus folks. So that one is going to have to go through the more granular refinement. And at any point through that refinement, we could discover, oh, suddenly what we thought was this big is that big, the value is there, it's shrunk to that. No, not worth it, kill it, throw it out. Or if we slice it like this, we can use an X-ray and look inside, and there's some gems over here, and that stuff can go, and now suddenly it's gone from that size to that size, but the value is maximized. And that refinement activity is a process, and it's an ongoing, regular process of evaluating those 4 questions. How valuable is it? How big is it? Is it worth it? And if it is, how ready is it?
I like that. I like that a lot. I see there's a question there, so I'll just throw that to you because it's relevant to what you're just saying. So what are your thoughts on MVPs and rats? Do they help smash those rocks, so to speak?
Yes, an MVP, a minimum viable product in the true intent of the MVP, the Eric Ries, Steve Blank MVP, not the minimum viable product as an excuse for the minimum crappy thing I can deliver, but the MVP as an experiment, yes, that would be one of my crushes. So I mentioned crushes. If we think back to the rock crushing metaphor, where you've got some stuff that has a higher specific gravity, and the gems are so you've got the gems inside that are very high specific gravity, but it's in a very dense rock. Well, you might need to throw in some tungsten balls into the crusher to break it apart. And in our metaphor, the crusher is an experiment that will help us crush a rock, to break apart and liberate the gem, the value. So the MVP could be just that. What's the thin slice that I can do that I can get into the hands of a real customer and start getting feedback? Another crusher might be a paper prototype is a good example of a crusher. And we've got something up in the forecasted or speculative. We're not ready to drill it, to break it down to a set of user stories and acceptance criteria. But I can do a paper prototype. And when we define a crusher, it has a very, very clear structure. In fact, anything that's in the rock crusher, is a well-formed rock. It has an intent, it has a verifiable model, and it has a test. Irrespective of the size of the thing, it has an intent, a verifiable model, and a test. So the intent might be, we have an idea, it's at that speculative level. We think this is worth doing. Before we commit a lot of organization resources to it, we need to validate this idea.
Yeah.
To validate this idea, we're going to build a paper prototype. And now we have the verifiable model. We've got a paper prototype that will show what this thing could be. My test, which is defined at the same time, I will show this paper prototype to a representative sample of 10 potential customers. If 8 of those customers say this is worth doing, then we will take it further. If 7 or less say it's worth doing, we will not take it further. So I'm defining that test, and it is a binary test. It's not, well, do they like it? It's 8 need to say yes, or it doesn't happen. And it's that hard, the test. And then what do? I run the test. I pull together my representative sample of 10 stakeholders, or 10 potential users. I show them the prototype, and we talk it through, and then at the end we get that feedback. Would you buy this? Yes or no? 7 people say yes, 3 say no, it's dead. 8 say yes, we take it further.
Perfect. And I'm reminded, just listening to you speak of that, so I was smiling quite so hard, and that is a very good friend of yours and mine, the lovely Pat Reed. And when you were saying true MVP, minimum viable everything. And never forget minimum marketable feature, which everyone seems to have forgotten. If you can't break your MVP down, use minimum marketable feature. Yeah, I really like that analogy, Shane, about how you break that down. The question I have for you is, in the model of the rock crusher, and you're obviously talking about these big backlogs, how does this function with scaling? Because scaling breaks the model. Scaling breaks the model in the terms of program increments or big room plannings, whatever the scaling model. I'm not actually poking at one particular scaling model here, let's be clear. All the scaling models have this preconception that you do a big kind of planning exercise, you bring it back, but it breaks that model as far as I'm concerned if you've got this backlog.
Yeah. So we've got a whole chapter in the book on scaling. And our principle 0 for scaling: first, do you really, really need to scale? Because preferably don't. And my assertion is that most organizations scale for the wrong reasons. They don't really have large, complicated products that have lots of dependencies. They have multiple semi-independent or completely independent products which could be run as completely separate value streams. Then you don't need the complexity of a big room planning activity where we're looking at the string on the wall and there's 27 dependencies. So the first thing is, can you break all those dependencies? But if you genuinely do have a complex product, and they do exist. Good examples are hardware-software combination systems, where you've got to have multiple streams of work going in parallel. If you are building medical devices, if you are building robotic lawnmowers, there will be multiple streams of work involved, and there will be some very, very hard dependencies. In that case, what I would, and we've got a number of different models in the book based around what is your complexity. One is we have the top of the filter is a single thing, then it drops into multiple, 2 or 3 or more separate independent funnels, which are basically your value streams, where there's as little dependency as possible across them. So, and where you've got that dependency, you want to define very early on the interface between the streams. So you define the API calls if you're building software. You define the hardware calls. Then in behind it, the team builds those, but those interfaces are locked in by contract. And none of the teams can change those after they've been agreed without a lot of careful consultation. Because if I change this, I'm screwing everything up for everyone around me. And if it does have to happen, and sometimes it will have to happen, then I've got to go cap in hand to the other teams and say, ouch, sorry. And now we've got to have a really hard conversation about what do we do and how do we prevent that in the future. So defining those interface points. If you have those parallel, largely independent streams, then we look for the synchronization points. And in that case, maybe a release train is a good idea. Because we do have, and we've got, in those complex product environments, we've got the technical capabilities now to do, blue-green releases, to do feature flags, all of that stuff. So at the technical level, we've solved that problem. We haven't solved it at the socio level. So in our socio-technical system, we're better in our technical system side than in our socio system side, shall I say. On the other hand, if it genuinely is a single big thing, well, that's your reality. And I'm going to go to Frederick Brooks. Throwing people at a late project just makes it later. Don't make the teams bigger. What is the smallest size of team that we can have that will achieve that? In Brooks' book, The Mythical Man Month, he asked now he was working with the teams who were writing the MVS operating system, and there were hundreds of people. And they were building what was at the time the most complicated piece of software in the world. When they looked at it and did a retrospective afterwards, the lead architect said, if I were to do it again, I would have taken 10 people and we probably would have taken a third of the time.
I like it. You and I grew up in this stuff as well. So what I like about the book, I can see the influence of what I call short cycle or short wave planning. Regardless of whether you're scaling or you're working in an environment, the shorter you can cycle your planning, the sharper you are on the size of your backlog. And I know people that have said to me, well, I don't understand this short wave cycle thing. We do programming. We have this quarterly plan. I said, but how often does that quarterly plan come back? And then your backlog is unadjustable. And by the time you get there anyway, the sand's moved and your teams don't achieve what they want to. When we grew up, I'm going to use myself for an example, right? I built a whole internet banking system where we're only planning no more than a month to 2 months in advance. Yes, we had a big roadmap of what we need to do. Of course you would. But that cyclical short wave cycle planning allows you to adapt. And I like that the premise of most of what you have in this book, even though you've addressed the scaling piece, still focuses on that short cycle, short wave.
Shrink the feedback loop. It's fundamental. And again, I want to say that there are organizations who don't need our book. They're the ones that we borrowed it from.
There are organizations out there doing this stuff well, right? Yeah. Nice comment here from John. Not a question as much, but I think it's a good conversation. Yeah. An information problem rather than a coordination problem. Yeah. I would go further and say it's not even an information problem, it's a culture problem. Expand on that for me, Shane. Dig a bit deeper in that.
It's a lack of trust. And it's creating silos of power.
So is that through the lack of transparency of the system and the ability for the system to flow the information? or is that through a lack of transparency through the structure of the leadership system, or is it both?
It's yes and. It's the organizations, and there's a lot of them still out there where knowledge is power. And in a tight economy where there isn't strong transparency and trust, where I'm feeling the potential threat of my role could be disestablished. Well, how do I make myself safe?
Yeah, I call it Dr. Spock, right? And you see this either intentionally or non-intentionally, right? So let's be really honest too. Sometimes this is created by the organizational redesign or reorganization has created this need for this, and people have ended up in that shape. But I call it Dr. Spock, and our job is to get rid of Dr. Spock. I know, tricky, and that's the single point of knowledge.
Yeah. But all too often there is that hold on to it rather than share and support.
So when we talk about breaking the work down, and you're not necessarily talking about the typical feature epic story because you're not wedded to that construct. So, which is what I liked when I read the book. Talk to that a little bit, Shane, because I think that's the go-to for most Agilists is we go there. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, that's one model. It's a useful model for some teams, but it should not be a guaranteed, this is the only view of the world. You can break it down using use cases. A rock could be a use case. Could I put that use case into a team? Yeah. Could we use that construct instead of feature epic story? Yeah. Personally, I like feature epic story, or actually I like Jeff Patton's original structure of user activity, user task, user story.
Yeah.
Because it gets that clear intent of the broad activity, the task that somebody is trying to achieve, and then the stories breaking down into how we will achieve that. We can prioritize those. Alistair, Ivor Jakobsen doing a lot of work on bringing use cases back.
Yes.
Bad use cases were the things that we loved to hate. Unfortunately, most use cases got tainted with the bad use case. Now, my co-author Steve, his first book was written with Alistair. It's Patterns for Effective Use Cases.
Yes.
From I think it was 2001. And that was the same problem. People not using the tools in the way that they were intended.
And I believe if you get a chance, shout out to Alistair. If you're at Agile America, you'll see he's doing a talk on bringing use cases and user stories together. I think it's a very interesting concept. And also, I'm going to take a moment to give Jeff a plug, Jeff Patton. Yes, we will get you on this show. We're trying to organise him. But, he's been a great influence on how you break work down, how you visualise work, how you map work as well. So I think it's great that you reference him in that. Let me ask you another question, a little bit of a right-hand turn. One of the things you talk about is maximising the potential of the backlog.
Mm-hmm.
So when you talk about potential, that's an interesting thing when you're talking about work that's being prioritised or it's work that's in the backlog. Talk to me about why you chose that particular turn of phrase.
Because we want people to really think hard about value. And the potential of a good backlog is maximizing the value for the organization. Scrum talks about the role of the product owner, responsible for maximizing the value of the work delivered by the team. The product owner in most organizations is the one tasked with managing that backlog. There's a lot of anti-patterns of product ownership. But if we can overcome those, we truly can have the backlog achieve what the original authors of Scrum, because it does come out of Scrum. It comes from Scrum, it comes from XP, but the term backlog was coined in the very first Scrum Guide as this prioritized list of things to be built. It's the prioritization of that value, and it's the potential of that value.
And I was having it go there so that I could ask my next question. So thank you. Great segue as always, Shane. I don't have to coach you. Coaching from the back of the room. So when I look at prioritization, there are many methods of prioritization, and I did slip into Moscow before, but of course, there have been other ones that have been propagated over the period of time, and I find that they damage the backlog. And I'm probably going to get done as a heretic here, but I'm not a fan of WSGIF. Because I think the shortest job metronome is a very hard thing in an organizational construct. But I'm interested in your thoughts about the better prioritize or the prioritization models that you see work. But that's just my version of it, of course.
Keep it as simple as possible. And I'm with you on WSGIF because I find it's easy to gamify. And again, it's in the organizations that don't need us, they just have a simple, okay, is this more important than that? What's the simplest? Dave Hussman, the dude. Value is, or value equals size over cost.
And I think if a lot more organizations actually use that equation, it would be a lot easier than applying these methods. Not to say that they don't have their places, but I do find that particular one is a bit broken with the weighting, because weighting can be gained. I see someone there saying, it might be Luke, who's saying that, he's been exploring jobs to be done.
Yeah, it's a great framework.
Yeah, great framework. It's when you start applying weightings and the game, I call it the politics of dancing and the game of waiting, right? Because people can weight it to enable what they want to get done.
Yeah.
And that's why I see it as a bit of a broken framework these days.
Yeah. And that's where, done well with absolute transparency and consistent agreement, it works. But anything that, and now we get into, again, the people, the culture, the politics. One organization I worked with that went in, I'd been asked to come in and explore why things were taking so long to get done. Product organization, they had the ideal agile structures. They had separate value streams, separate independent, cross-functional collaborative teams, very little dependence between their product streams. Product owners who had all of the right knowledge and training. And then we mapped their actual process. And we looked at the flow. And all 20 of those product owners, when we mapped out their full process, their value stream map, had a bottleneck.
Mm-hmm.
Where once the product owner had made a decision, they had to get permission from a higher authority. That higher authority was the chief executive. And he's the person who brought me in to come and have a look at what's wrong. So this is where it helps sometimes to be the expensive independent consultant. You can speak truth to power. So I was able to go to the chief executive with all of these value stream maps and say, well, we've identified there's a bottleneck here. On all of your product flows, there's a bottleneck. And we were able to actually put metrics. The cycle time for that decision was 6 weeks. Because 20 product streams were sending decision requests to this individual who was the chief executive of the organization and was a busy person. It was a hard conversation because I was asking this man to shift his perspective. We ended up using the Management 3.0 delegation poker and so forth. And it took about 3 months, but got to a point where, yes, it would flow.
Lovely. So, Shane, we're getting close to the end of our time, and we could spend a lot more time on your book, but I just want to touch on something very quickly that's dear to your heart as well, and that's coaching ethics. Talk to me a little bit just quickly about coaching ethics, your involvement, and how people who are listening could be involved in that as well.
Cool. Well, wow. You know, it's 4 years now.
Yeah, it is. It's been that long.
It's been that long. There's an initiative of the Agile Alliance, which is to come up with a code of ethical conduct for Agile coaching. So if we think of the other coaching professions, life coaching, professional coaching, there are very, very clear codes of conduct, code of ethics, that if you become an ICF member, you have to sign the code of ethics. If you are a counselor, you have to sign the code of ethics. Agile coaching has nothing like that. You want to be an Agile coach? Print a business card. Or just change your title on LinkedIn. Now I'm an Agile coach. A group of us, Craig Smith and myself, were two that were part of founding this thing. We were sitting down at an Agile conference, bemoaning the state, and somebody challenged us to do something about it. And we picked it up, and we did go to the Alliance and formed this initiative. We went out to a fairly large volunteer group, at one point we had 30 plus people working on coming up with the wording, the language of a code of ethical conduct for Agile coaching. We drew on other codes of ethics that were out there. We were inspired very strongly by a lot of Bob Gallen's work. And Daniel Mezek as well. Yep. Daniel really challenged us, which was fantastic because he made us stop and think about a lot of things. Bob's work was really great. We looked at the ICF, we looked at the International Association of Facilitators and various other bodies, and we come up with an 18-point code of ethical conduct that we believe should stand in good stead for an Agile coach. If we behave like this, we are being ethical in the work that we do. We'd love to see more coaches use it as part of their coaching engagement, coaching alliance with the teams and organizations they work with. We'd love to see more organizations insist that their coaches align with and commit to the code of ethical conduct. It's definitely gaining traction.
Yeah.
It's on the Agile Alliance website. It's under Member Initiatives, Agile Coaching Code of Ethics, and anyone can download it. Shortly, I don't think it's been... No, it hasn't yet. There will be a mechanism to actually sign the code at some point. We partnered with Scrum.org, and they have put together a quiz which presents ethical scenarios where people can assess themselves and think, how do I feel about that? And it links back to the ethics. It's been translated into a number of different languages now, and there's more ongoing. It's currently, I think, at version 3. We know it's never going to be finished. We're always looking for feedback. We ask folks to, it's released Creative Commons. Anyone can take it and use it. We want people to take it and use it.
Yeah, and so what I will say with that is, firstly, I encourage everyone to get involved. It's a great thing, especially for people like myself and yourself who've been doing this and seeing agile coaching grow from where we started in many, we'll just say a long time ago. Yeah, I had hair.
I had more.
You'll find that in the show notes below. So I'll add that to the show notes of this particular show. Along with Shane, how can people get in touch with you around the book? How can they find it? How can they get in touch with Shane Hastie?
So there is a book website. It is the Rock Crusher. Let me just make sure. Oh. Yes, the rockcrusher.org. If you go to rockcrusher.com, you get a physical rock crusher.
So don't do that. All right, we'll pop that in the show notes as well.
Yeah, you can buy the book from Amazon. It's published with the IIBA, so there's links on the IIBA website. It's available in Dead Tree version and also in Kindle version. And reach out to me on LinkedIn or via SoftEd.
Fantastic. Look, Shane, awesome to have you on. As I always say to many of my guests, we could talk for hours on it. We know you and I could talk for hours on it because
we have done so more than once.
We've already done so many times. It's been a pleasure to have you on at Talking Remote today. Thank you so much.
Tony, thank you. It's always a joy to catch up.